Hey there. So today I have Safrianna Lughna, who is the queer spirit guide, as how to identify her. And she's an author, among many other things, and we will get to know her. Thank you for coming on here.
Absolutely. I loved meeting you in our first conversations, and I'm just excited to have the opportunity to talk to you again about whatever.
Yeah, about whatever, because that's what it will be. We were connected by Adriana Keefe, who is human design um, healer, whatever, therapy coach. But she connected us and we just met and we talked about like 6 weeks ago. And we're like, sure, you're cool. We'll
Yeah,
know each other. So here we are. And so yeah, like share us with you, like tell us about yourself.
absolutely. So you already said I'm Safrianna Lughna, the Queer Spirit Guide. I am a presently retired trauma therapist, to be determined if I enter the world again. But I was a trauma therapist and then an English teacher before that. So I've been in very sort of corporate, very strict careers until recently when I stepped back from my private practice to pursue my writing career full time and pivot to being more of a guide.
Hmm.
And I will say I did tiptoe into the coaching world and I realized it just wasn't the model that was right for me, which is
Hmm.
why I really settled into that guide. I love to literally like be in the trenches with my people, like walking with them to where they want to go, and that really lights me up. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm in flux like many of us are, I think, but my ultimate role here is to just help people shine their light and be who they really are.
And who's like the people that seek you out? Like what are they typically going through or struggling with that they find you?
Yeah, normal my average client, I would say, um, despite being the queer spirit guide, I would actually say I have like 50% heterosexual straight monogamous clients, and
Mhm.
then the other 50% are polyamorous queer, like, not. And it's just a really interesting divide. So all people of all, genders, sexual orientations, but mainly my clients are really
Mhm.
successful with air quotes
Right.
by societal standards. They've gotten the credentials, they've gotten the degree, they've gotten the 6 or 7 figure job, they've climbed the ranks through corporate or through nonprofits or through whatever they thought was going to make them successful. And they're miserable and they feel stuck.
Mhm.
And it's because money is not the ultimate
Right.
answer we were told it was. Yeah.
And so you use which skills of yours to help guide these folks?
All of them. That's the exciting thing about being a guide instead of like a super traditional therapist or teacher is I get to really, and I do it with informed consent. I let my clients know exactly what techniques we can use, and they
Mhm.
literally get like a checkbox list that they can say, yeah, these willing to try these, or no, thank you.
Right.
So I use everything from druidry and shamanism based skills
Mhm.
to Reiki to internal family systems and acceptance and commitment therapy and mindfulness based cognitive therapy and like all of these therapeutic techniques that I've studied over the years, EFT tapping,
Right. Right.
holistic integrative health, so nutrition and sleep and movement.
Yeah, I mean, it's
L-
just like you have your bag of tools and whatever applies to this person.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was when I was a therapist, it felt like those intuitive things, the energy healing, like that was less accessible unless a client was like, I didn't advertise that,
Mhm.
right? Because I
Right.
figured I would get kicked out of the profession.
Yeah.
And I actually have some stories around that, but that's a whole other thing. But as a guide, I can come right out and say, like, here's all the things that are available to
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
What are you looking for? Instead of like, you have a diagnosis and I need to use the tools that your insurance company says I have to try
Right.
and
Right.
fix the problem.
I know it is limited. And I know a therapist who, really lit up about the Reiki conversations and the energy. And she herself is quite intuitive. So to be able to have permission to go outside the parameters of what the therapist role
Hmm.
is. So she's looking to expand her business to have like a separate section where she can do that for her
Yeah.
clients, outside of the scope of the traditional therapeutic approach. So that's really cool that you're not limited, you know.
Yeah. I see more and more therapists breaking away like that.
Yeah.
actually. Some
Yeah.
are keeping their practices. I actually know a therapist who is a therapist and coach, and when you go to her website, you literally say, I want a therapist or I want a coach. It costs exactly the same, like the
Mhm.
pathways are more or less the same, but it's are you focused on your diagnosis or are you focused on your holistic being and sort of the big
Yeah.
picture of life in a different way. So I like that people can discern because therapy, like, don't get me wrong, I am very pro therapy. I think all of us should have a therapist at some
Mhm.
point to work through things and that mental health piece is really important.
Right.
And I'm here to reform the therapy world in a way where the therapists and the clients can be taken care of and we don't have to focus so much on the diagnosis piece because almost everything stems back to trauma anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a friend who became a therapist later in life, and her complaint now is like, oh my God, all the paperwork like that she has to submit, or I guess to insurance and whatever.
Yes.
So she's like, I could do the therapy part forever. It's just the, the paperwork part is taking up so much of her time. So
Mhm.
I'm sure that's a factor too.
It absolutely is, and what's really interesting is I really like taking notes for my
Hmm.
clients. Like, I actually enjoy that part.
Hmm.
When I first got my start out as a therapist, I was in a nonprofit agency, and we didn't have insurance, and there was no clients didn't pay. So our note keeping was whatever we wanted to keep, and of course, our supervisors were like, "You need to keep clinical notes." Made sense. But I literally made myself a form by hand that I would just jot notes down, and that I've reignited that now that I'm a guide. And
Hmm.
literally, I have like a little folder for each client with a printed out sheet of paper that has the numbered sessions, and I just jot down because
Yeah.
and that's like pro tips for anyone in the healing world, whether you're a therapist, coach, body worker, like doesn't matter. Having just those little notes
Hmm.
helps build that rapport with clients because you remember more
Right.
easily.
Totally.
And it helps you notice those trends. So
Mm.
I love the note keeping, but for insurance, it was like you've got to do all of these things. You've got to make sure you submit it in a certain way. And it was so much paperwork. I really like get where
Yeah.
you're
Yeah, the
coming
work
from.
part of paperwork. Like I'm actually not the greatest at taking notes on my clients, but I if I remember to, I do. And I make it
Mhm.
in my appointment calendar. And I'm always so grateful for the times that I do that for myself, because you're like, oh shit, how old are their kids? Like that they have little kids, but you can't remember which age they are. So
Right.
it just sucks because you build such a strong relationship in the moment. And then if you don't have a record of it, it's hard to keep track. There's so many people, so it's just for your own best interest to like have a
Absolutely.
record. So you started out as an English teacher first, or was it, yeah, so that was like you thought when you were little, like you knew you liked helping people, so teaching
Well,
made sense.
what's really interesting is when I was really little, I wanted to be an author.
Oh, really?
Um, in second grade, we did this like activity where like a special company came into the school and we got to write books and then we printed them out on the old printers. They were
Hmm.
hilarious with the sheets with the perforated corners,
Yeah.
all like it was hilarious. And they spiral bound our little printed books for us. So we had a tangible book that we published. And
Nice.
I was 6 and I'm holding this thing and I'm like, this is my life dream. Like, this is what I'm here for. And I, like, even thinking back to that, I get lit up because it
Hmm.
was so me. And then I started to hear messages as I grew up. I took a test and I was 60th percentile for spelling, and my teachers and my parents started telling me I couldn't spell. And I'm like, well,
Yeah.
how am I supposed to be a writer if I can't spell? This is before
Oh.
spell check, right?
Hmm.
So I got really down about that. And then, in school, teachers started to comment like, oh, you're too wordy or you're too this.
Hmm.
And to complicate matters, my number one fan was my childhood abuser.
Oh.
So I grew up and was like, I don't know if I want to be a writer anymore because I'd heard all like, you're never going to make it as a writer. Writers don't make money. Like, you can't
Hmm.
be an author. You need a backup plan. So my backup plan was to be a teacher.
Right.
I was like, I can still love literature. I can still teach writing. I can still write in my spare time. I didn't realize I wasn't going to have any spare time as
Hmm.
a teacher. No one tells you these things.
Hmm.
Um, and so by the time that I was getting ready to go to college, I wanted to go for art
Hmm.
actually and be an art teacher, but complicated series of events, it did not happen. And I lost family support. So I went to college. I got married. I got student loans, and I
Hmm.
went to undergrad and became an English teacher, and I was in that for nearly a decade.
Yeah. And then that imploded or
It
changed
was it
directions, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I was writing books like in my early 20s, and then I became the English teacher, and then I had no time
Hmm.
whatsoever
Hmm.
because when you're teaching over 150 students
Yeah. It's a
and
lot of papers to grade.
you
Yeah.
have to grade papers that the state is telling you you are mandated to give these tests.
Yeah.
Like I had no time. But what was happening was I had this group of queer kids that kept showing up in my room at lunchtime that
Oh.
wanted a friend. They wanted an adult that would validate their experience. And I had a poster in my room that said that I was a safe space and it had a rainbow on it.
Hmm.
They kind of identified me. They were like,
Hmm.
oh, we could talk to her. So next thing I know, I have a group of like 5 or 6 kids at a time in my room for lunch. And we called it Anime Club. Because the school, the kids, these were already kids that were ostracized and people called them weird and stuff just for
What
being
grade?
who they
What
were.
grades were they?
Eighth.
Eighth. Okay.
So they're 13,
Yeah.
14, in
Yeah.
some cases 15, but like, yeah, they're in the hormone flux. So they would
Hmm.
just come sit in my room, we'd chat, and they'd bring up stuff to me that was like, hey, you need to go to the guidance counselor for that. Like, I've
Yeah.
literally been given training that I'm not allowed to talk to you about this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that feeling of like my job is potentially on the line,
Hmm.
I didn't know what to do with that. It felt so awful. So I went back to grad school and
Hmm.
became a therapist.
Okay.
And ironically enough, interestingly enough, several of my students found me years later and I was their
Aw.
therapist.
Aw. That's really cool.
It was very cool. So all of this was out of that. I don't really want to be me, but I do want to help people. I wanted to help people through books,
Hmm.
but now I'm being, shunted into the productivity culture and the you need a real job and like all of these
Hmm.
stories. And so I kind of followed what felt like the right thing to do based on society and
Right.
everybody else.
Yeah, for sure. I know. I never had a real job. I had a summer job where I pretended to be an adult in college, and I was like, I cannot do this. I can't. Like commuting and working in an office, and I don't know. I just knew it was wrong for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, I never had a real job. So luckily, I could do massage. That was my real job, but I never had to do like the total, full conforming of what society wants or expects. So
Yes. Down
and
to like everything.
that could be my Aquarius rising. That's-
I love that forward thinker. And you just knew right away, like, ooh, this is not right. And yeah, it's like looking back, I see all the ways that I was on another podcast recently and she was very like corporate background. And I'm like, oh, I don't have any experience in corporate. And she's like, no, you taught and you worked for agencies, corporate.
Mhm.
And I really sat with that and I'm like, oh, yeah, I do. Because what is the education system
Yeah.
but essentially a corporation that says this is the result we're looking for. This is how you treat your employees. This is like,
Mhm.
and the meetings and the paperwork and the red tape and instead of the consumer, it's the
Mhm.
parent that we're worried
Mhm.
about.
Right.
But we only really cater to the needs of the parents that just want their kids to have high grades. We don't cater to the needs of parents that have legitimate concerns about their children's safety or
Oh my God.
expression.
I know. I remember going to, oh, I forget what is it called? Like when you want like, help for your kid.
Like a parent teacher
Yeah.
conference or
But it
like
was like, but
an
like
IEP
you get the
meeting.
label of the your
Yeah.
IEPs.
Hmm.
So we were maybe considering that for Grace when she was in like third grade because she had just been diagnosed with autism. And it was like, but they were just all sitting there trying to convince us we're fine and she's fine and everything's okay. But I remember like looking at the therapist, like, or the guidance counselor, and like being like, I like we are seeing the same thing, but like she is like she's shackled to the rules, And I remember just like reading them and knowing that those who were on board and those who were robots, in the administration, and being really kind of frustrated by the limits of the system. So we let them win. We didn't pursue it. She was a good student, but um she didn't raise any trouble. So why give her
Right.
any help, because she did her job and she didn't cause havoc. So, you know,
It's so frustrating because it's It's the really disruptive kids that get the attention, which makes
Hmm.
sense because they're disrupting the environment.
Right.
Why are they disrupting the environment? Because they're not getting the supports that they need.
Hmm.
Even
Yeah.
and the school can't account for all of the supports they need either,
Hmm.
especially when the budgets are low.
Right.
And like, because there can be aides and whatnot, but then that child goes home to their environment,
Hmm.
right? Like with
Right.
you, there's clearly a loving environment, like you're
Hmm.
looking out for her needs,
Yeah.
like you're showing up for her. These kids that are really disruptive don't have that
I know.
usually.
I know. I know. It must be very hard. And I've had friends who are teachers, and you hear the stories of like all of the terrible things, like not every kid has a healthy, happy home.
Yeah.
To get that insight must be really taking a toll on all of the people that are loving these children, all day
Yeah.
long.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And
So
there's
you
so little that can be done from the teachers and the guidance counselors and whatnot because, yeah, I love that you said shackled, right? Shackled to the
Mhm.
rules. And
Yeah.
there is this threat like, we can remove you if we want to. We
Yeah.
don't need you.
Right. Yeah. It's rough. So eventually, so that one of the therapists from one of the meetings, not the one I'm thinking of in particular when she was in third grade, but like she became a client. And it was just like, I know you were a light worker too, like she's just like, followed the directions of society, and did this work, but now she's kind of stuck in this job and whatever. So
Hmm.
it's good for you for breaking free, and pursuing your passion and being able to do all of it without anything
Yeah.
you back. So
Thank you.
you said you're in your author era now. So
Hmm.
that's so cool that you came back to that, like all these years later.
Yeah. I
Still
mean,
in there.
to ignore that was eating me alive.
Hmm.
And it's been so interesting. I let my private practice go in August of 2023. So at the very end of August, that was it. So September was my clean slate. So we're at a year now as we're
Okay.
recording this. And I did so much self-work during this time because I had to confront all of the reasons that I wasn't writing.
Hmm.
And that was real ugly to look at. It was a lot of emotions and a lot of energy to move. But in the last year, I have published two solo works.
Hmm.
So my debut novel, which is actually a queer lit piece about pregnancy loss, and then my first poetry book, which was about overcoming trauma as a woman in modern American society.
Hmm.
And then in literally 3 weeks, oh my gosh, it might not even be 3 weeks. My next poetry book, Daddy's Girl, is coming out. So we are firmly in the writer era.
Yeah.
I mean, three books in a full like year
Yeah.
cycle will be what it will end up being.
Hmm.
And I helped edit and co-write an anthology called Shadow Alchemy earlier this year as well. It was like an interesting, oh, this is how I can really work with authors now and teach them the craft similarly to how I taught, but in like a new and updated way. So it's a really exciting time. And I literally wrote in my debut novel a dedication to that second grader me.
Aw.
I was like, look, you're holding your own book again. Like, yay. But that's, oh my gosh, it was so nerve-wracking to get to that point. And I have so many, I had so much trauma around unveiling my voice to the world.
Hmm.
Like,
Well,
truly.
and probably enough from just this life alone, but then, lifetimes before.
Oh, we've been clearing that stuff out too. Yeah. In the last calendar year, there's also been a lot of past life energy healing and
Hmm.
clearing and soul contracts concluding. And it's just like, I don't even hardly recognize who I am now versus who I was a year ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is there a cool, like, I'm sure there's many cool stories within there, but is there a story that within there that you want to like share? Because I love past life shit.
Oh gosh. So this last year, and it's really interesting. I left the relationship so many years ago now,
Mhm.
but there was just this energy like hanging. And every intuitive healer that I talked to, every friend that was intuitive, every healer I went to work on something else, literally something else, they'd be like, there's this guy in your life. I'm like, not in my life, thank you. Like,
Yeah.
completely removed. And they're like, well, he's still eating your energy. And they just kept getting these like every
Yeah.
time. And we would close it out and it would open back up. And I'm like, I was just so tired. I was so tired of this coming back up because
Mhm.
again, I was like, I'm over it. I
Yeah.
really am so over this. Well,
Right.
apparently I wasn't.
Yeah. Some aspect of you is still whole.
Some
Yeah.
part, yeah. And so there were two moments that really helped with that. One was an intuitive healer said, like, return any bit of him you still have in you. So did
Hmm.
that. That
Hmm.
was a 6-hour ritual.
Oh my gosh.
And it was so long that I hit like bedtime and I'm like, okay, we're stopping and we'll come back tomorrow. Like I literally had to stop the ritual and come back and finish it up the next morning. And it ended up being 6 hours total. But I worked with a intuitive healer, who's a dear friend and part of my soul group. And she did a lot of past life healing. I think the technique is called SRT. I have not, it's actually one of the techniques I've never studied, so I don't know a lot about it, but essentially you check with charts and a pendulum, and the practitioner
Okay.
is checking to see if there's contracts in different places. And I mean, she was so brilliant at it, and it was a long healing session, but in that, several past lives came up with this guy, and
Hmm.
finally we were able to unhook that. And one of the past lives, first, there was a past life that came up with a healer that she's like, I've never seen something from this society before. Like, this is clearly not Earth.
Oh, neat.
I'm like, makes more sense as you'd
You're like that.
realize,
That
but
tracks. That tracks.
we're not going to talk about that right now. I was still very shy about being not of Earth at that time.
Oh, well, yeah. I've been reading Dolores Cannon for years, but I'm currently reading the Three Waves of Volunteers in the New Earth. So I'm like knee deep in the freaking alien shit.
Oh my, well, we could have a whole talk there too. But yeah, so this healer saw essentially me as a dragon-like rider. It's not an actual dragon when we think dragon, but like
Mhm.
an air worm, like a society that had these flying
Okay.
animal companions. And this intuitive's like, I don't know what I'm going through right now. But literally, like I was kicked out with my worm-like companion and essentially told I was no good at at being this leader with this, dragon mount, and I wasn't allowed to do it anymore, and I was kicked out, and it was that guy that kicked me out and was like, you're shunned from society. And that actually mirrored a lot of what happened in this
Wow.
life, was this like, oh, you're daring to push back a little bit. We're kicking you out of like all of your support systems. And
Wow.
so as that healed and we removed that, what surfaced was actually this soul level contract I had for overworking.
Hmm.
It was like I had just agreed to take on
Hmm.
everything because I thought I needed to. And this was a soul contract that was just there for so long. So when that got
Yeah.
cleared,
Yeah. Feels
the
good.
guy finally, like, it was super funny. Very shortly after all of this clearing happened, he actually contacted me again for the first time in years. And he
Hmm.
was like, hey, we still have that car that your name is on, and I want to get rid of the car. Are you okay with signing off on it? And I was like, like,
Yeah.
yes, because it was the last thing that was
Yeah.
open in
The
this
tether.
lifetime.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, a literal contract that you're signing off.
Yes, I was like, goodbye. It felt so good. And it was after all of this clearing and
Wow, that I love how it happens like that, literally, because like I mean, it's truth. Like once you cut those cords, like the people will reach back out again for like one final, like they felt the cord cut. But that's cool that it was like a literal contract that
it
you.
was literally a contract. Yeah, he's like, can you sign this form online? And it was literally, he did it easy peasy. Like I thought it was going to be drama. It was not.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, what bliss that we're finally done with this nonsense.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
really cool. I love that. I was curious, when did you get started with like the witchy stuff? Like, was that like a childhood thing, or did that come later on?
So looking back, especially as I've been writing this upcoming book, I've been looking a lot at my childhood, and I was like the little druid baby when I was a kid.
Hmm.
I was up in the tree. I've written a lot of poems about what I call my mother maple. It was literally
Hmm.
a maple tree that mothered me.
Hmm.
And I was in that tree like 24/7. I was looking at the flowers, I'm looking at the bees and the birds and the fairies and all of that. And then school started
Hmm.
and the magic slowly drained out of my existence, and then abuse started and chaos started, and I just never really recovered that until I was legally an adult.
Okay.
So pretty much, I moved out the day I turned 18.
Mm-hmm.
I ran away to Tennessee, married a slightly older man, not like a really, really older man, but an older man nonetheless.
Right.
And about 3 weeks before, no, I guess it was about 3 months before we got married. I woke up from a dead slumber one day and like sat up in bed and I went, I'm a druid.
Hmm.
And it was like this mantle settled back in, and I had no idea what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
So I found my way to the local bookstore and dug around the bookshelves and bought my first tarot deck at
Mm-hmm.
18, which was
Mm-hmm.
the fairy tarot. And that was, and then I bought Louise Hay's You Can Heal Your Life. I think I bought them on the same day actually.
Oh, wow. That's really
And
cool.
that was my turning point. So I got deeply involved with and helped found an eclectic coven when I was 19. And I was
Mm-hmm.
the secretary for that for several years. And that led into me leading a lot of rituals like as early as 20 and just having like fantastic mentorship, like
Yeah.
learning from people who were doing the hands-on thing, that were guiding the rituals, that were leading the meditations, that were creating the settings. And so I got to learn all of that hands-on,
Oh, wow.
and I've never gone back.
Well, all the witchy things for me was like taboo because I was
Mhm.
raised Catholic and my dad was like, that's, tools of the devil. So
Yep.
I didn't go that direction. I never did. I remember like I created a meetup group where I was living like in 2011, and it was like called the Spiritual Discussion Group. Like it was like very boring name, but it was like Ocean County Spiritual Discussion Group because that's where I was living. And people occasionally would call and be like something asking me about my coven. I'm like, I don't have a coven. Covens are bad. Like, and I don't identify as having a coven still, but like it's just vernacular.
Uh-huh.
But it was just funny because I remember being like, what? Like, how is this even close to being witchy? Like I had no idea. I didn't know
That
because
is so hilarious because my group that I met was
mm-hmm,
on Meetup,
mm-hmm.
and it was originally a pagan discussion group.
How funny.
And so I was like, okay, yeah, I want to find like-minded people. That was literally the gateway. And yeah, I grew up Christian. I grew up not really going to church until I was in my teens. Like we
Mm-hmm,
went to church occasionally, like once in a blue moon for a holiday or because we were invited to go with somebody. But
mm-hmm,
it wasn't until I was 15 that I actually got really into Christianity. Like really, like me and Jesus,
yeah,
besties, right? Like so I was writing essays in high school on Jesus. Like I loved Jesus.
yeah. Well, Jesus is
And
cool.
yeah, he is exactly. Like I say, Jesus is a bro. Like
Yeah,
not in a gross bro marketer, but like in the your
oh,
best bro kind of
yeah,
way.
yeah.
And my church kicked me out when I was 15 for being bisexual and wearing too much black one day. And I
Oh
was
my
like, wow,
God.
this isn't the support that I thought I was getting. And is that how Jesus really thinks?
That's
So I had this identity thing. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
it like to tell kids that, like, it's just so sad.
Yeah.
So that was part of when I first realized I was a druid. I was still connected very much into Christianity, and I didn't know what to do because I thought I was going to be shot down or like with a lightning bolt or suddenly be
Yeah.
transported to hell. Like I totally get all of that fear. Many of us
Right.
have that, and it's something that I've written not a lot about, but I do have a lot of poetry that hints at that religious trauma piece because so many of us have experienced it
Yeah. I know
through
there's a
ages.
there's a woman, I had her on my podcast like a year ago. She's down in Australia. Her handle is suburban witch or suburban witchcraft, I forget. But she was in the evangelical world and
Mhm.
and totally has some crazy stories. It's just terrible, like to outcast people. So
Yeah.
yeah, she literally went through the outcast in this life in that
I
sense.
went, yes, I did several times with several different spiritual communities.
Yeah.
One when I was a kid for being gay, and then the other as an adult for speaking up against this person. But I was
Yeah.
like, hey, this person's kind of in a position of leadership. Do you realize that this is how this person is behind closed doors?
Your abuser.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And I was kicked out instead. And I was like, okay, well, and this was not like a Christian group. Like I would expect that almost in a lot of organized Christian groups at this point because a lot of them are, well, if they're a man, they're entitled to do those things, right? Like there's
Right.
still so much of that. I'm not saying that's true of all Christian churches, thank goodness. Like I know a
Yeah,
lot of great Christians
of
now.
course.
But the man gets the final say is so common in that sphere. And this was more earth-based, more
Mhm.
non-traditional, more open. And the attitude was literally, well, he's ours and we're reforming him,
Hmm.
was the message I got back. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah. Okay.
great. Okay,
Yeah.
you can continue to reform him while he's literally providing spiritual teaching for hundreds of people. Great.
Yeah.
Like the lack of ethics and accountability. Because I wasn't saying kick this person out. I was saying we need to be able to have a conversation about how this kind of energy doesn't continue.
Right. Right.
Because it does. If it's not called out, if it's not brought up, if it's not explored how to break free from it, we
Hmm.
stay in the same patterns.
It's just gonna keep perpetuating. Yeah.
Yeah. I know this person's patterns, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Well, did. Now I'm like, I have no idea what's going on over there, and that feels wonderful.
And like
Love it.
you've since like moved away and started your own like new life somewhere else. You're not like in like bumping up against people in the same community still or what?
We are a little bit.
Okay.
I don't actually know like where he lives now or anything like that, but I'm assuming he's still somewhat local because I don't
Mhm.
think he would necessarily have the means to go away. And my family is here. Like I'm closer location wise to my family, for example, than he is to his.
Right.
Not that I necessarily have strong family ties, but like I've been here for a long while and I like it here.
Hmm.
So I don't want to have to go, but
Right.
I've also done my due diligence as much as I can to remove my connections to those groups. Any people that could still be connected to him, I know are not like deeply connected to him. And I
Yeah.
don't even check anymore. Like I
Right.
used to have this fear. In fact, in my publishing journey, that was a big thing. I was like, I don't want to publish because what if he finds it and he reads it? And,
Hmm.
what if he has feelings about what I write?
Yeah.
And so I was publishing under a pen name and I wasn't writing anything honest or like
Hmm. Yeah.
nonfiction honest. I was just writing fiction and
Right.
using pen names. And then I was like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
Why am I keeping myself small
Hmm.
on the chance that it's going to make him mad if he goes out of his way to purchase
I know.
my publications and
Yeah.
read them? And anything that I write, like, unless somebody literally was in our life at the same time,
Hmm.
they'd have no clue. There's not
Right.
enough context clues.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I know it. That's what it's like. You think like, how hard would someone have to be stalking you to sift through the whole podcast episode to find the 1 minute where
yeah,
you're like the chances of them really hearing this are small.
but those are the fears that we have, especially like I have experienced, and at the hands of this person and other people, I have experienced a lot of violence.
Hmm.
And so when I say like I understand fear, I mean it. Like I understand how big fear can be and how much it can hold us back.
Yeah.
Really genuinely do. And I'm on the other side of it now where I'm still with the fear. The fear still exists. It doesn't
Right.
poof, but
Yeah.
I don't let it control me anymore
Right.
because I've been brave enough to put myself out there enough times where I'm like, okay, nothing's bad has happened yet.
Hmm.
The first podcast that I ever talked about being not of Earth, I was like, I'm gonna get canceled tomorrow. People are gonna see this. They're
Yeah.
gonna go, oh my gosh, Safrianna's crazy. We're never gonna trust her again. No,
Yeah.
that's not what happened at all.
I remember I had a guest teacher on like during 2020, it was like some class I was offering, and she decided to go into light language, and I was like, oh geez, like we've gone one step too far for like this group, but the whole group was all about it. They were crying. Like I was so on guard because I was like
Yes.
making sure everyone's faces were neutral or positive, not tuning
Yes.
out, or I didn't even benefit from it because I was like so stressed about everybody's reaction to it. But yeah, it's like
I know that
people are
feeling.
freaking. Yeah.
So I experienced hearing light language for the first time through like a red tent event I went to.
Mhm.
And it was online and they didn't give any warnings. Like not that they needed to give warnings, but I'm super trauma informed.
Right.
And so here I'm like in meditation and one of the And like one of the instructors just starts spouting light language, and my whole nervous system set on fire. I was like, what's happening? And
Yeah.
it brought up that religious trauma. Like, we're
Yeah.
speaking in tongues now. What does this mean?
Hmm.
So that was a very interesting experience. And then fast forward, I guess it was about probably 8 months later. I do these free moon calls. It's new moon and full moon every single month. That's my heart offering to the world.
Hmm.
And I just stream live so anyone can watch it. There's no like finding the Zoom room, anything like that. Like, simple, stress-free, straightforward. But this time was not stress-free because I'm on live and I always channel a meditation, and we're in the middle of the meditation and I'm like, you're stepping into your next level. That's coming through. And all of a sudden, like, spirit goes, and you're going to speak light language. That's your next level. And I was like, oh no, please no. Please. And I'm like panicking
Yeah.
internally while trying. I'm like also balancing the energy for the collective. I'm like, all right, Safriana, manage your own stuff here. So I'm breathing, I'm continuing to channel, and it's still like, okay, you're gonna speak the light language. And then it came through, and I was like, I did the thing. And since then, because I had no idea that time it was gonna happen.
Had you
Since
ever
the
had it happen before that?
No.
Yeah, yeah, because I've never channeled light language.
Yeah, it was bizarre. And so ever since then, I every meditation I say, and during this, I may speak some light language. If you hear me speaking in a non-English language, this is what it means. It's just a frequency. There's no harm in it. It's
Right.
to activate, clear, or otherwise like solidify something that's being
Hmm.
channeled on either side,
Yeah.
basically. Because I know that exact, like, I could see me hosting a group thing and then the guest like doing light language and me not warning the group. I'd be like, I didn't know this is going to happen. I'm so sorry. Because yeah, the newness factor can really
Yeah.
shock people.
Yeah, because you're like, oh, it might be a mixed bag of people online and they don't know what the heck is happening. And you just feel like a responsibility for it.
Yes. So
Yeah.
feel that.
Did you feel like you went through metamorphosis this summer?
Yeah, it's actually funny you mentioned metamorphosis. One of my signature programs is my butterfly immersion, which
Oh,
takes you
funny.
through the transformation sequence that
Okay.
you can use with any problem. And I actually did it this summer. Like, I use my own material, which feels weird but also great. And I was doing it with overwork. So we
Mhm.
released that overworking contract, but there was still some egoic, like,
Yeah, because when
human
you
stuff
mentioned that
happening.
before, I don't know if we talked about this when I talked to you the last time or not, but like I've since talked about it on my last podcast, but I had a thing where I felt responsible for carrying everybody, you know, and my teacher was like, why do you feel like you need to do this? You know, and it was like in session, and I was just like, you spot out the first answer, and I'm like, I need to validate my existence. It's
Mm,
like, what? Why?
mm.
So and then, it had to do with, she said she heard that, like, because I snuck in because my parents weren't planning on having a fifth child, and I, you know, found my way into this family. So I had to justify my existence by like helping lots of people and overburdening
Ugh,
myself. And you're like, what? Why? Okay, can we get rid of that?
yeah.
So yeah, I had a similar, so that was part of my metamorphosis this summer, was just like unpeeling, like peeling back the layers and figuring out, what I need to do for me and not
Right.
carry so much. So it
Ugh.
is, I guess, a similar overworking program or something.
Yeah, this like I need to earn my spot in the community.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's so interesting because often as healers, whatever type of healer we may be, we're providing support to other people. We're encouraging them to take care of themselves, but to
Right.
take care of ourselves is sometimes so challenging
Hmm.
because so many of us healers got into healing because there's this underlying thing, this underlying soul contract or pattern or just belief that we've been carrying with us, whether through this lifetime or many others. And
Hmm.
we have to be willing to look to find those things, to unpack them and stop letting them run the show.
Yeah. So it's been interesting, and I've just been more proactive in my self-care. I did let it slip. I remember, kind of watching myself being like, what are you doing? Like, why are you bringing your phone to the bed at night? Like, that's a habit that I had stopped doing, and then I like let it roll back in and being like, justifying everything, and, oh, I don't have time to do this or that. And it's like, holy crap. So it's important to
The ego is one hell of a drug.
it is. I know, because I remember being like, this is the shit I tell my clients about. Like what, I felt like almost like an imposter, like a traitor to myself. Like I didn't even do what I know I should be doing. So that was,
A very common story for many of us. Totally feel that.
yeah,
Works in progress.
yeah, of course. So then you said you do your live calls, like I'm going to be on your live call. So like explain where you're heading with that, or like what you're just closing out and what you're going to transition to.
Yeah. So I started doing, my spouse and I booted a podcast in 2021, 2022. It's so hard to remember when we kicked this off.
Yeah.
A wild few years since 2020. It's been like a century. But we started a program and then we did our first full season. It was just the two of us talking about queer stuff and authenticity and releasing shame, which is our brand.
Mm-hmm.
And then season 2 we were doing guests. And it was very like not real conversations. It just kind of felt like business pitches
Mm-hmm.
because I was marketing to business people. And now I realize like, oh, I was going about connecting the wrong way. So then in 2020, like late 2022 into 2023, I started doing my own interviews called
Mm-hmm.
Soul Connection Calls, which were kind of just like this, like we just have a conversation and we bounce back and forth.
Right.
And that feels like it's coming to a close. Um, so I'm going to be transitioning into doing a live show called The Shadow Side with Safrianna, which is going to go even deeper. Like I loved a lot of the interviews and conversations, and some of them we did go deep just because that's who the guest was sitting across from me and we were able to do that. But now I really want to hone in on finding those people that want to have those tough conversations, like religious trauma, like overcoming silence and visibility issues, like literally these things that so many people experience but
Mm-hmm.
just don't talk about.
Right.
And the cool thing about the Shadow Side with Safriana is if I want to get on and do a show just by myself, I can. Whereas Soul
Mm-hmm.
Connection Call was a connection which requires two people. So I kind of pigeonholed myself and I'm like, well, I don't want to start a whole other program because I also do side podcasts. I do a podcast called the Inner Tapestry series with my friend Red Moon Eagle, who's a psychic catalyst, and we talk about untangling the patriarchy and religious trauma and blueprint stuff and all kinds of things. So I was like, we've just got a lot going on here. Let's really clarify. So we're going to pull it down to the one Shadow Side
Right.
show, and then my show with Red, and then the Living Luna podcast.
Just a few things.
Few things, but things that can flex with me more because
Yeah.
I'm really entering a chapter where I am really in the authenticity and all about everyone else's authenticity. And that was the turning point was I'm helping everyone else be authentic. Why am I not being authentic? And that's
Mm-hmm.
why I had to leave behind insurance companies and like all the
Mm-hmm.
paperwork and because it wasn't authentic.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of where I'm going next is focusing on the writing and still having podcasts because I love talking
Yeah.
about really important topics with incredible people. So that I can't let that go because it lights me up so much.
Yeah.
But new form.
That's cool. So yeah, I look forward to being on your show in a couple of weeks. And then
Absolutely.
I don't know, anything else, like where do people find you if they want to like learn more about you or work with you?
Yeah, so safriana.com, Safrianna.
Mhm.
That is the best way to find me. My email is guide@safriana.com. That is the best way to try and get directly in touch with me. But if you go to my website, you can find all the stuff I do. And you can schedule to chat for 15 minutes if that feels relevant to you. But otherwise, if you want to hang out, you're
Mhm.
like, this is just a cool person. I want to be in their community. I
Right.
invite you to go to livinglunas.com. So that's Luna, living Luna with an S at the
Oh,
end.com. And that is, you can get our Discord link. You can come hang out with us in Discord. We share silly memes. There's a question of the day. It's just a lighthearted community. And that shows you about all the other things that we do as a brand.
that's
So, yeah.
yeah, I mean that's nice because it's like it just even with like the tween class I did over the summer, a lot of the kids that are drawn to my work are in the pride spectrum, and it's like it's the most inclusive freaking cool down to earth group of people, and like and like I think that one of the kids was saying, I said something like, well, I'm an ally, and then he's like, what's an ally? And then he's like, oh, I'm an ally. And the one kid had gay parents, and he's like, well, I've got two moms. So it was just so cute hearing the way they talk.
Yeah.
And it's just like such a loving and safe place. So it's like, it's really awesome what you create for people, because that's like the most real as it gets, and the most, accepting and nurturing, and it's a wonderful thing. So I got pulled
Thank
into
you.
the community with my daughter Grace, as you know. So it's like it's such a wonderful thing. I don't, the hate, I don't understand the hate. So I'm glad that people have a place to go for lots of love. and right.
Thank you. Yeah, in our community, we definitely have
And of course, I know, I
straight
know
people in our community. Like we have lots of allies too, and
that's the point. It's like, it's inclusive. It's just,
yes.
if you are a loving person that believes in like just nurturing and supporting one another. You don't have to identify as gay or have or queer, or have kids that are in this in the pride community. Like, it doesn't matter.
Yes.
I just like that it's so inclusive, and it's such a wonderful place to be. so
Yeah.
so
I
thank
always
you.
say we just attract compassionate people.
Yeah, that's the word. Yeah, just compassionate, loving. Why
That's
is
what I'm
that such
here.
a terrible thing?
Why is that such a terrible thing? And yeah, that's why I keep fighting for better every day and having these conversations. So thank you so much
For
for,
sure.
fostering these conversations.
My pleasure. And I'll talk with you soon.
Absolutely. I look
Thanks,
forward to having
Safrianna.
you on my show.
Okay, I'll see you.